Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show live stream. Join the show, get the whole thing, patreon.com/TMBS. Stay tuned for the other show at 7 p.m. with David Starr and Guillermo Long. And hit us with a super chat donation while you watch this. I'm very excited to be joined now by our friend, the man on the ground, the co-editor of Brazil Wire, which is the any adjective you can use. I'll just say the absolutely indispensable source for following all things Brazil. Our friend Brian Mier. Brian, thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me. It's good to hear your voice now that Lula's free.
Yeah, man. Well, that's what I wanted to. Let's just start with that. I mean, as I just want to reiterate, because we've been following this story really closely from the beginning of this show, and there's no way that we would have been able to do it effectively without you being a guest frequently, and then the Brazil Wire as a source. So how do you feel with the release of President Lula, and what's the energy on the ground been like in Brazil the past week?
Well, it's still sinking in. It came as a shock to me. There had been so many lousy things that had happened since 2015 in Brazil. It just seems like every time you turn around, something worse is happening. And so I didn't have a lot of high hopes for him getting out of jail, but it happened. One of the Supreme Court justices quoted Angela Davis, who'd just been down in Brazil talking about Lula livre. Yep. And another justice mentioned the Intercept leaks, even though it wasn't officially used as a justification for the decision. It was mentioned in the conversations that were going on. And then they announced the ruling, and it was like, okay, well, he's going to be out. Probably they'll do anything they can to make an exception to keep him behind bars, because they've been doing that the whole time. And it was like, he was just like out the next day. I was planning on going down to Curitiba over the weekend. I thought it would take a couple days. He was out, and then a day later, he was in São Bernardo in front of the ABC Metal Workers Union, which he helped, which he directed during the famous Wildcat strikes of the late 70s. With this hero's welcome, I went out there, and I was supposed to be filming for Telesur, but I just started drinking. I was so happy. And,
that's awesome.
I met all these people, and we're like drinking cachaça. And then my friend was like, hey, I'm up with Lula. Come on up. And I looked, and there was like, I don't know, 50,000 people there packed very tightly in. Yep. So I just kind of sort of semi-drunkenly pushed my way up through this crowd, that's massive right. crowd, saying, I'm sorry. And then I got in, and some of the security people doing the security were the MSTs, just like the Nation of Islam used to do security for civil rights leaders who were in danger of being assassinated in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
This People's Social Movement was doing the security. So they recognized me, let me in. Someone else recognized me. Next thing you know, I was in this hallway, and I met Lula,
awesome.
for a few seconds.
Right.
And it was just really mind-blowing, And then I just even behind three walls of security, everyone around him was trying to hug him.
Right.
And
right.
He was just like, he was carried out of there at the end of his speech. And in his speech, he started talking about what he's going to do now. He's traveling around the country, and he's really building up the narrative, pushing away at the narrative that the country is currently being ruled by paramilitary militias. Bolsonaro is a militiaman.
Right.
And this is picking up a lot of momentum with the working class and the poor. They identify with this message. They know Bolsonaro's a militia guy. Everyone knows that. And so he just gave a speech on Sunday in Recife. 200,000 people went out to see him.
What do you, and so actually, well, but let's just stay on the positive then. I mean, what keeps spelling out, what is Lula talking about? One of the things that really struck me, in addition to everything you'd expect, the charisma, the clear denunciation of the Bolsonaro regime, the discussion of Brazilian sovereignty and dignity, and the, excoriating Moro and all of these, corrupt prosecutors and the car wash investigation. But he's also talking about Uber and the temp economy. He has a in some respects, I mean, clearly, I mean, he took that time to read a lot of books and think very deeply about the world, which obviously he does anyways, but he had without distractions, right? So he has this purely 2019. I mean, it's so of the moment. What is he talking about? And I just want to put in, I mentioned this last week. Steve Bannon gave a Brazil, an interview, I think for Portuguese or Brazil BBC, where he said, Lula is the hero of the of the globalists, which is, of course, I mean, we would never take Steve Bannon at face value, but if you're going to say neoliberal, that's ridiculous. Lula is a man of the left. But I think Sloppy Steve is right in the sense that Lula has a very compelling counter narrative to the neo-fascism, not only of Brazil, but, Trump and globally.
Yeah, well, the media has built up, as you know, all kinds of ridiculous false narratives about they've been trying to basically erase what the PT years were from existence. And so even leftists, some leftists who are like anti-PT left or whatever, trying to act like it was just Lula now, it wasn't Dilma. But the fact is, the reason that they try to make Lula out to be this kind of like cult-like figure who has this magnetism that sends poor people out of control in support of him. But what he really stands for, and the reason that people love him, is that he's the embodiment of this 30-year-long, political movement that was built by working-class social movements, liberation theology sectors of the Catholic Church, and labor unions to reformulate the country and build social democracy. So he stands for an idea. He stands for a project for Brazil, which is based on the principles of developmentism, or in Brazil they say desenvolvimentalismo, which was this kind of economic strategy developed by Raul Prebisch and Celso Furtado and ECLAC, which was a UN agency in Chile in the 1940s and 50s, which is based on doing some of the things that the US did in its formative years, meaning working hard to create internal markets for internal manufacturing and production, not just privatizing everything, keeping key industries under state control, like electricity, petroleum, and things like that. Investing heavily in science and technology, just as Jawaharlal Nehru did in India, for example,
right.
And maintaining the country geopolitically as a kind of non-aligned country, in opening up multilateral relations with other southern countries and things like that. That's what he stands for. That's the project for government. And, strong minimum wage policies, strong public health, free public universities, these kinds of things. That's why people support him, because he's the person who managed to push this stuff through. And this is what's been systematically dismantled to the overjoyment of American media, bourgeois media like New York Times and Washington Post over the last 3 years. So now when Lula's talking about Uber, it's because they've basically wiped out all of the labor rights in Brazil since the 2016 coup. So everything's Uberized now here. Right. My current job, Brazilian job, for this Brazilian web TV and media company 247 is Uberized even, I don't have, before the labor reforms, I remember I got laid off from a NGO job I had for 5 years in Brazil for Action Aid, right? Mm-hmm. And according to Brazilian law, they had to give me $30,000 severance package.
Wow.
You had job security here before 2016. And so when he's talking about Uber now, this is what he's talking about. There's no more mandatory severance package for the vast majority of Brazilian workers. Now, the majority of workers are temp, or they're actually slipped back into the informal economy. Homelessness is going through the roof. 15 million people have fallen into extreme poverty, and they've just, Chileanized the retirement system,
right?
So that people don't really have the right to retire anymore. And so he's talking about undoing all of that, and that's why people are coming up behind him. That's why his support has grown since he got out. And Bolsonaro, they were saying, I think in Washington Post or somewhere, that this is going to polarize the country. And Lula saying, yeah, it should polarize the country. But they were saying this is going to increase support for Bolsonaro. But Bolsonaro's popularity rate immediately dropped after Lula was released from prison. Dropped another 3 points to 27%.
What about Moro's
So it's not like
rate?
This 50-50. More, yeah.
What about Moro's rates going down?
Under,
yeah, okay.
also going down, dropped below 50% also for the first time ever. There's still this kind of cult-like following for him because of all of there's a couple of new things that have come out today, like it's just The Intercept Brazil just released this story that Google was down here training anti-PT, anti-Lula vloggers, 25 of the most popular ones in the country during the lead up to the 2016 coup. All right. So there's been this systematic character assassination going on, and and there was systematic cheerleading for Moro, and so a lot of people still believe in him and don't believe in the Intercept, but the legal system is beginning to come down on him. I still feel like there's a good chance he's going to end up in jail.
That would be amazing. But
and
what did
rightfully so?
And absolutely, I'm not abolish prisons for him. What about tell us about the social movements that are protecting Lula? You mentioned the MST before, and I think this is really important. One, because Brazil has some of them. I think David Harvey is an example called the Landless Workers Movement. I think he called it the world's perfect social movement. These are important.
He actually punched me when I questioned him on that, when we were drinking beers together at the World Social Forum in 2009, he punched me in the arm.
Wow. All right.
Because I was actually working with them at the time. I was managing a project with the Landless Peasants Movement. And I was a little bit like, well, there are some issues. And he punched me in the arm. He said, where's your sense of utopia?
Brian Mier gets that out of David Harvey. That's awesome. So talk about these movements. I mean, talk about who's guarding Lula and where these movements come from. And I guess you could also debunk another, kind of lazy left myth that gets perpetuated, that the relationship between, look, it's one thing to say there's obviously going to be tension between government and social movements, of course, but it was not severed. I mean, you see that I just want to say, you see that in Bolivia right now. Of course there was push from the left, from the authentic left, against some of the things Morales did. But now in a post-coup environment, of course, actual non-CIA front group or non-AstroTurf front group, left groups back Morales. So, and similarly, in Brazil, these groups and PT and Lula are very tight.
Yeah, they're very tight, and they've always been very critical of PT. But okay, so the MST, they used to translate their name as the Landless Peasants Movement, but really what they call themselves is the Landless Rural Workers Movement. They started in the 1970s. The 64 coup happened because the left government was trying to enact land reform. Brazil has the most unequal land distribution in the countryside, probably in the world. A few hundred families own most of the land, and most of it was stolen. It was never actually purchased or anything, and a lot of times at gunpoint kicking peasants off their land. And so the groups of small farmers, landless farmers, started banding together under the organization work a lot of times of these kind of like anarchists and communist liberation theology priests and nuns in southern Brazil, and started occupying land that, it might have been officially owned by somebody, but that was not being used productively, And so since then, hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Brian, go ahead.
Did I get cut off?
No, you're good. You're all good. You're loud and clear. Oh, Brian, is this a problem at our end? No. Brian, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We've heard you the whole time. Are you there? All right, folks, I'm going to just call him right back. Sorry about this. This is part of the trick of live broadcast, but we're going to call him right back. Show. International show, man. All right, we're calling him right back. Can you take that down? Oh, shit. I think his internet went out.
I'll try one more time.
Yeah, I'll try one more time. Yeah, cut away from me.
Take a little break.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm not really sure what happened there, but I think we've lost our connection to Brian. Obviously, he'll be back on the show again soon. He's a friend of show. Where everybody read Brazil Wire. And I just want to say, in addition to that yes, Bolsonaro's numbers are going down. There's been these massive outpourings for Lula across the country and a revitalization of the PT. The mainstream media, corporate media coverage on this continues to just be abominable in terms of just the most rank false equivalencies. They obviously express the economic desires of Western corporate interests and other extractive interests in Brazil. And the other thing that I want people to think about, that Pepe Escobar, who's been a guest on this show, will release the full interview with him for everybody soon, wrote a piece in the Asia Times about first, Brazil as the sort of ground floor of lawfare and this different kind of like broader political warfare, using the judiciary, using media, using propaganda as targeted against the left in Brazil. And now, as really in some ways the most outsized argument between neo-fascism and social democracy, or as he calls it, I think he says it's coked up evangelism. This sort of relationship, and Brian mentioned that earlier, the ongoing revelations about very deep possible connections between the Bolsonaro family and the Rio de Janeiro militias, the assassination of Marielle Franco. All this is up for play. Obviously, we'll continue to be covering it more. I recommend everybody read Brazil Wire, and we'll be back live in about another 35 minutes for the TMBS main show. Thanks, everybody.